Cuckoo! Welcome to Prof Modern. My name is Wendy, or as my students know me, Madam Boss. In today's video, I wanted to talk about the first day of Zoom. I started school a couple of weeks ago, and I felt very terrified about what the first Zoom or video lesson was going to look like. Your district may not be using Zoom. Maybe you guys are using Google Meets or something that is similar to Zoom, to a video chat type platform for your classes. Taking the experience that I had and also the really kind of long thinking I had about how to approach the first day of an online class, I felt that I did a pretty good job. So I wanted to make a video where I walked you through my process and hopefully give you some tips to help you out for your first day with your students online, whenever that day may be. So the first tip that I have for you is to resist the urge to treat this like a regular class period. When we were, so I like to call all this pre-corona stuff the before times. So we're gonna refer to this as the before times. In the before times, we would be in a classroom all together, all the students in one place, and they kind of sort of have no choice but to listen to you. So, and that's just the fact of the matter. Maybe they droned out a little bit here and there, but it didn't change the fact that they were in the same room with you. We are now in a situation where these students are at home, and it can be very, very easy for them to mute you, to not turn their camera on, and to not even be in the room. And we need to understand that those options are a reality. When we think about the way we would approach a class on a given day of school, or even the procedures that you would go over on the first day of school, we have to make sure that we understand that this isn't the way that we can approach online teaching. It's not the same. And the sooner that we understand that this is a completely different monster, I think the sooner that we can maybe modify and adjust to meet the students where they are, and also for ourselves and for our own sanity. So tip number one, do not treat this like your classroom. Avoid lecturing them. That's tip number one. This is not your classroom. So tip number two actually coincides a lot with tip number one. The best thing that you can do is to keep it simple. Something that we need to understand as humans, and I feel it's a kind of a cop-out as adults to say, like, it's just this generation and these kids with their phones, but it's not. It's evolved to the point where we as humans cannot pay attention for a very long time. Our attention spans have decreased. I mean, we're in the age of TikTok and in the age of Instagram Reels and Snapchat. You're going to be finding yourself making your life a lot easier if, at least for the first day and for the first couple of days, you keep it simple and you ease them into it. It's important that we treat this like anything else that's new. You would want to walk somebody through. You want to hold their hand through something. And even though, like, for example, I teach high school, and we want to believe that high school students don't need that. But the reality is that this technology is new for everybody, and it takes some getting used to. So keeping those things in mind, our ridiculously short attention spans that have evolved over time in the internet age, and the fact that we are approaching teaching in such a different way, it's very important that we keep it simple and that we don't overwhelm the students with too much information. The next tip that I have for the first day of school is to give them something to do. It's important that we establish from the get-go that even though we aren't teaching in a regular classroom, certain structures of school still apply. You are still giving them work to do. They are still being expected to perform in some capacity, but just like in the previous tip, make sure that what you're giving them to do is simple. It is, once again, a new method of teaching. If we ease them into it as opposed to bombarding them with even work, not just information, you may find that they are more willing to do the work for you than if you were to give them multiple things to accomplish in one class period or in one day. As a semi like sub point to the previous point, we want to make sure that we don't forget that the students are at home. They are probably not going to start doing the work immediately after you assign it to them, especially not in the first days when they don't really understand what the procedures and what the scheduling is going to be like what the general feel of a given class day is going to be like. They don't know that yet. So if you give them something that is very involved for them to do, coupled with the fact that they're at home, the reality is that, and this is obviously not going to be for every situation, because we do have students that want to work and they want to start school, but it's important that we understand that with everything that's been going on in these past couple of months, we are coming back to do school in a different format. We are suffering through a global pandemic. We are having to put attention to and raise awareness of the social injustices that have existed in our country. These students are coming into and being asked to be present in a world that is completely different from the one that we left when we were asked to go into quarantine and the last time that you saw them in person. From a psychological standpoint, I believe that it's important that we show some empathy towards what they're going through and ourselves. And like as teachers, I think that sometimes we forget about how we're feeling, and it is important that you consider your own feeling. Don't allow yourself to feel that just because we had a definition of what teaching was before we were asked to quarantine, it doesn't mean that you are going to have to approach teaching with that same descriptor and that same mindset. We are in a new age of teaching, and what that is going to look like is going to be defined by us and what we decide to do going forward. My next tip, and I feel like this is a very important one, is to make sure that you gauge your students' understanding and comprehension of how to use technology. It has been a very interesting journey, learning the amount of technical and technological knowledge that my students have. Even though they grew up with technology and they have smartphones that can do all kinds of things that we probably wouldn't have even dreamed of when we were using our flip phones and brick Nokias and all of this stuff. The task of writing an email, of sending an email, of attaching something to an email, of uploading something to your Google Classroom, of recording your voice on your phone, all of those things are actually kind of tricky to some students. I mean, this is a whole nother video, but we have to make sure that we are also being empathetic about the amount of technology that students actually have access to. Depending on the population and the demographic of students that you teach, the technology that students are accustomed to is not the same. And starting out the school year, because they are going to be asked to use so much technology in cooperation with in the way that we're teaching them, if we don't address the disparities between their comprehension of technology, you are going to find yourself having a lot of problems later on in your teaching. Imagine a situation where you assign them a speaking activity, or you ask them to record themselves and submit a recording of their voice. There could be a situation where you have very few students actually complete the activity because we didn't take the opportunity to establish like an even starting point. Going into online teaching, I truly believe that that really needs to be the starting out point. It isn't to say that we can't incorporate some of the target language into teaching them how to utilize these things, but it definitely is going to be important to make sure we address, does everybody know how to do this? Can you perform these tasks online? And if we take the time to do that from the beginning, we're going to find ourselves having a much easier time later. My next tip is to create small groups. The first reason I thought that it would be useful to create small groups is that we as teachers don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of students that are entering this virtual environment. It's easier to take attendance because you have fewer students to be counting for. We are able to make sure that the student is front and center in our online meeting. Imagine a situation where you did one meeting for all, let's just say 30 students, because my average class size is 30 students. And I don't know if that's actually the average, around cross contents or whatever, but that's just my average. So in my brain, I'm thinking 30. And if you have a meet that is 30 students, and it's 30 students say that you're meeting for the first time, how can we make them feel accountable for their presence? They are going to have a much easier time hiding in a crowd if there are more people present in a meeting. So when you create an environment that's a little bit smaller, it feels like a more personalized attention to each of your students. It shows that you are wanting to create a less stressful environment for them, where they don't feel these pressures of, I have to say something or I have to show my face in front of 30 other people at the same time, where I probably have not left my house in months and I don't remember how to brush my hair or put on eyeliner. I mean, these are teenagers we're talking about, and they are feeling stressed, and hopefully we can remember a time to when we were their age. And I know that at their age, when I was their age, I felt constantly judged. So I didn't want to put them in a situation where they would feel like that, because I know if I were in the situation that I'm describing, where it's one giant online class, I would absolutely feel that way. So we want to create a stress-free zone for them and for you. Now, in this stress-free zone, you could probably ask them to do something in the target language and they would feel a little bit less shy about it. I started out my Zooms with 10 students apiece because I expected my classes to be 30. The first day, and I think the first week that I did Zooms, I did 3 groups of 10 students apiece. It was work in the setup of it, and I definitely had to be on for a little bit longer than if I had done all the classes at the same time. But that individual attention and that stress-free environment that was created in a small group made it easier for the students to be willing to use the target language. And the very first day of school, the only thing that I required them to tell me was bonjour. And having done that, having only required them to do that, I got a 100% participation, which was awesome. And they feel like they accomplished something without having to feel the strain and the stress of a normal class day and a class period, which goes back to my first point: keep it simple.